What happens when a lie tears a family apart? My parents chose her over my brother, but I fought for him.
It was a regular afternoon when everything changed. I was waiting outside school for my older brother, Kirby, as I always did. But that day, he did show up. As the minutes turned into hours, a sense of dread began to settle in. I had no idea that waiting for him would be the last time I'd ever see my family the same way again. When my sister finally picked me up, we drove home in silence, unaware of the nightmare awaiting us. As we entered the house, the sound of shattering glass and screams filled the air. I froze, my heart racing. There on the floor lay Kirby, bloodied and bruised, while our parents screamed at him in fury. The truth behind this chaotic scene would shatter everything I knew about my family. An innocent brother caught in a web of lies and betrayal that would forever change the course of our lives.
The chaos that erupted that day felt like a nightmare come to life. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, unable to comprehend the madness unfolding just in my eyes. My brother, Kirby, lying on the floor, covered in bruises and blood, was nothing like the kind-hearted person I knew him to be. The anger in our parents' eyes was terrifying, something I had never seen before. My father, the man who had always been my protector, was now kicking and screaming at Kirby, calling him names I couldn't even bear to repeat. My mother's words cut deeper than any physical blow, accusing Kirby of the most unimaginable things. I couldn't understand what had happened to them, to us. They had always been the pillars of our family, the ones we turned to for safety and love. Yet in that moment, they were nothing but strangers. The fear that gripped me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever known. I wanted to run, to scream, to make it all stop, but I couldn't move. My sister Lucy pulled me upstairs, her face as pale as mine, her voice shaky as she whispered for me to stay hidden, to stay safe. I did as she said, but my mind raced with questions. Why was Kirby on the floor, injured beyond recognition? Why had our parents, the ones who should have protected him, turned on him so mercilessly? It didn't make sense. My brother was a kind soul, a person who would never harm anyone. Yet, in that moment, the world seemed to betray him. The fear that gripped me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever known. I wanted to run, to scream, to make it all stop, but I couldn't move. My sister, Lucy, pulled me upstairs, her face as pale as mine, her voice shaky as she whispered for me to stay hidden, to stay safe. I did as she said, but my mind raced with questions. Why was Kirby on the floor, injured beyond recognition? Why had our parents, the ones who should have protected him, turned on him so mercilessly? It didn't make sense. My brother was a kind soul, a person who would never harm anyone. Yet, in that moment, the world seemed to betray him. The sirens I heard outside only added to the dread filling the house. I had no idea that this was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel my family in ways I could never have imagined. A false accusation, a broken family, and a bond that would be tested in ways that would leave scars far deeper than any physical injury.
The sirens outside seemed to echo in my mind as I huddled in the corner of the room, clutching Lucy's arm. My thoughts were racing, and every question seemed to lead to more confusion and pain. The chaos downstairs had died down, but the damage was done. I could still hear my parents' angry shouts, the harsh words they hurled at Kirby. My brother, lying there in a pool of his own blood, had done nothing wrong. Why was this happening? What had gone so terribly wrong in our family? The next few hours were a blur. Police officers, flashing lights, and the terrifying sound of my parents being dragged away in handcuffs. They screamed at Kirby the whole time, their voices filled with hate and rage. It felt like everything I knew about my parents had disintegrated in an instant. Lucy tried to comfort me, but even her words couldn't fill the empty space of confusion and fear I felt. She explained what had happened, her voice shaky and full of anger. The girl, Karen, her accusation had been the catalyst for everything. My brother, who had always been a protector, was now being accused of something so horrific that it made my stomach turn just thinking about it. Karen, the girl he had once helped, the girl he had been there for, she had lied. She had fabricated a story about him, one so vile it almost destroyed his life. Lucy told me about the investigation, the tests, and how Kirby had tried to explain the truth, but no one believed him. I could barely grasp the enormity of it all. It felt like my entire world had been flipped upside down. The pain Kirby had to endure, the physical and emotional trauma from our parents' betrayal. It was too much for anyone to handle. But what hurt the most was the silence of our family. The disbelief that the people we had trusted most were the ones who had turned on him. In the face of such an overwhelming lie, all I could do was hold on to Kirby and hope that somehow the truth would come to light before it was too late.
As the days dragged on, the weight of everything began to sink in. The scene from that day replayed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Our parents were in jail, and yet it felt like we were the ones trapped in some kind of emotional prison. Lucy and I had become the ones to hold everything together, the ones who had to face the reality of what had happened. Kirby, though physically healing from his wounds, was spiraling in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. The trauma from our parents' actions had left scars deeper than anything the doctors could fix. His silence, the vacant look in his eyes, and the fear that gripped him every time he thought about returning home, it all tore at my heart. It wasn't until we learned the truth about Karen that the world around me seemed to collapse entirely. I had known that the accusations against Kirby didn't make sense, but the revelation that Karen had fabricated the entire story was a gut-wrenching blow. The girl who had once been his friend, who he had trusted, had turned on him for petty revenge. She had used the power of her words to destroy a young man's life, all because of a fight between them at school. As Lucy told me how the police had gathered evidence, how Karen's former friend had come forward with the truth, my rage boiled over. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Karen had known exactly what she was doing when she accused Kirby, and the damage she had caused was irreparable. But what shook me to my core wasn't just the revelation about Karen. It was how easily our parents had believed her. The people who were supposed to protect Kirby had instead chosen to believe a stranger's words over their own son's pleas for help. My father, who had always been a figure of strength, now felt like a complete stranger to me. And my mother, her guilt and denial only added to the suffocating atmosphere. She begged for forgiveness, but there was no coming back from this, not after what they had done. Kirby's pain wasn't just physical anymore. It was in every moment of silence, every tear he didn't shed, every day he spent in a state of numbness. As I looked at my parents sitting there in the police van, the finality of it all hit me. We had lost them. And yet, despite everything, I knew I had to be there for Kirby. For as long as he needed me, I would fight alongside him, even if it meant facing a family who could no longer be called family.
As the days turned into weeks, a quiet fury begun to build inside me. The truth about Karen's lie had shattered everything, but the most unbearable part was the cold silence from our parents. They had chosen to side with her, and no amount of pleading or guilt could undo the damage they had done. Despite their apologies, despite the tear-filled phone calls begging for forgiveness, I couldn't bring myself to even look at them. They had not only betrayed Kirby, they had betrayed me too. They had destroyed the one thing that had always kept us together, trust. And I wasn't sure it was something I could ever rebuild, not after seeing them behave so monstrously. But Kirby, he was a different story. Watching him struggle through each day, witnessing the emotional wreckage left behind by our parents' actions tore me apart. The physical scars were bad enough, but the mental scars, the PTSD, the fear, the deep, unrelenting sadness were far worse. Kirby wasn't just a shell of the person he used to be. He was a man who had been broken, not just by the people who should have loved him unconditionally, but by the cruel indifference of a society that could so easily dismiss the truth. I couldn't bear seeing him like this, lost in his own despair, retreating further into silence with each passing day. Then came the moment that would forever haunt me. My parents, after everything, dared to show up at the hospital where Kirby was recovering. It was as if they thought their apologies could erase the years of pain they had caused. But when they walked into that sterile, white room and saw Kirby, still battered, still broken, he screamed at them. The sound of his voice, raw with years of pain and anger, echoed through the room, filling me with a sickening sense of justice. He refused to even look at them. They were not welcome in his world anymore. His scream wasn't just a rejection of them, it was a rejection of everything they had done to him. It was a cry for freedom, for healing, for the chance to move forward without the suffocating presence of people who had destroyed him. I wanted to rush to his side to protect him from their presence, but Kirby didn't need me to. For the first time, I saw him stand strong, stand firm in his truth. I could see the pain in his eyes, but there was something else too, a new strength, a quiet defiance. He wasn't going back to them. He wasn't going to let them continue to ruin his life. And in that moment, I realized something. No matter what happened, we would survive this, together.
After everything that had happened, the silence in our home was unbearable. It was a hollow kind of silence, where every unspoken word was like a weight pressing down on my chest. Our parents had failed us in ways I never thought possible, and now they were out of our lives, at least for the moment. But that didn't mean the storm was over. The bitterness, the anger, and the sorrow still hung heavy in the air. Kirby, despite his resilience, was still struggling to find himself again. The emotional toll from the violence, the betrayal, and the guilt was unbearable. He wasn't the same person anymore. I could see the way he flinched at loud noises, the way he kept his head down in public, like he was always waiting for someone to strike. I wanted to fix everything, to make it right, but I didn't know how. Then came the moment that would change everything. As much as I hated to admit it, there was a part of me that still cared about my parents. Despite the unforgivable actions they had taken, they were still my parents. And when I saw my mother, broken and crying, begging me to forgive her, I felt a pang of sympathy. But I didn't act on it. Instead, I watched from a distance as she tried to manipulate the situation, trying to make us feel guilty for cutting her off. She came to the hospital where Kirby was recovering, attempting to reconcile, telling us that we needed to be a family again. It was the same old routine: apologize, beg for forgiveness, and hope we would just forget the past. But I knew better now. Kirby had no intention of going back to them. He was done. And when our mother tried to walk into his room that day, I saw something in his eyes, something fierce, something full of rage. He shouted at her, words that I had never thought I'd hear from him. "I will never come back to you," he said, voice shaking with fury. The shock on her face was almost laughable, but the anger that had been bubbling inside Kirby for so long finally burst out. My heart ached as I watched him, my brother, who had been through hell, stand up for himself. In that moment, I saw a new side of him, a man who had been broken, but who was no longer afraid to fight for his future. And as he turned his back on them for good, I knew that there was no going back. Our lives had been shattered by their actions, but it was our choice now to pick up the pieces. Together, we would move forward.
The weeks that followed were a whirlpool of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. Kirby had made his decision, and I had made mine. We were no longer tied to a family that had betrayed us in the worst possible way. The quiet that had settled in our home was a reminder of just how broken everything had become. But even in the silence, I could feel the tension. Every knock at the door, every phone call, it all felt like an impending storm. And soon enough, it arrived. It was a Saturday afternoon when they showed up at Kirby's grandparents' house, my parents. I could see them through the window, standing outside, their faces filled with desperation. My mother's tear-streaked face was the hardest to look at. She had come to beg for forgiveness, to make amends, as if everything could be undone with a few words. I could feel the urge to go out there, to confront them, to make them understand just how much they had destroyed. But I knew it wasn't my battle anymore. This wasn't about me. It was about Kirby. When he saw them standing there, I could see his entire body stiffen. He was still recovering, not just physically, but emotionally. The scars they had left on him were deeper than I had ever imagined. But this was his fight. I stepped back, allowing him to make the choice. He looked at me, then back at them, and I saw the anger flash in his eyes again. The same anger that had erupted the day they tried to force their way back into his life. "Get out." Kirby's voice was cold, sharp. "You don't get to walk back in like nothing happened. You're not welcome here." The finality in his tone left no room for debate. For the first time, Kirby stood fully in control of his own fate, not letting anyone, not even our parents, take that away from him. I could feel a weight lift from my chest as I watched them turn away, defeated. They had lost us forever, and there was nothing they could say to change that. As I stood by Kirby's side, I knew that we were finally free to move forward, together.
In the aftermath of that moment, the truth became undeniable. Our family was fractured beyond repair. I could see it in the way our parents no longer tried to contact us, their calls going unanswered, their messages left unread. There was nothing left to say. Kirby's decision to shut them out had been the turning point, and in many ways, it had freed us both. But as we began to find our own peace, a new layer of complexity emerged. The lies they had spun, the manipulation, the cold dismissal of the truth. It all weighed on me more heavily than I expected. I was still angry, still hurt by the choices they made. But I couldn't help but wonder how they could have so easily discarded us, their own flesh and blood. And then it happened, the moment I feared but knew was inevitable. During a family gathering, when everyone had gathered to support Kirby, our parents did what they did best. They lied. My father, with his usual bravado, spun a story to the rest of the family, painting Kirby as the villain, the one who had abandoned them. He claimed that Kirby had run away to some drug-infested place, leaving behind the family who had always supported him. It was like everything we had been through was suddenly twisted into a story that suited their narrative. Lucy and I exchanged looks, our hearts sinking as we realized that even after everything, our parents still didn't understand the gravity of their actions. With fire in her eyes, Lucy stood up and began to expose their lies, recounting everything that had truly happened, the abuse, the false accusations, and their refusal to listen to the truth. As the rest of the family watched, shocked and silent, I saw Kirby stand tall for the first time in weeks. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about us, about reclaiming our story from the people who had nearly destroyed us. That day, the last thread of our family's illusion was cut for good. We were free, and there was no turning back.
As the days passed, so after that brutal confrontation, I found myself grappling with the aftermath of our family's collapse. The lies had been exposed, and yet, the weight of what we had all been through still hung heavily in the air. The bruises on Kirby's body were healing, but the scars left on his soul ran deeper than I ever imagined. He was no longer the joyful, protective older brother I had once known. Instead, he had become a shell of himself, quiet, withdrawn, and haunted by the trauma of our parents' betrayal. Every time I looked at him, I could see the broken pieces of the man he used to be. The man who had once been a rock for me, now crumbled under the weight of everything that had happened. It wasn't just physical pain that had torn him apart. It was the emotional devastation, the unbearable weight of knowing that the people who were supposed to love and protect him had turned their backs on him so easily. And as much as I wanted to fix everything, I knew it wasn't that simple. I could see the toll it was taking on him. He had become a shadow of his former self, and I could feel the chasm growing between us. But then came the day that would change everything again. My parents tried to make contact, as they had done countless times before, but this time there was no apology, no attempt to explain their actions. Instead, they sent someone, my father's mother, the one person who had always been a source of tension in our family. She came to Kirby's grandparents' house, a smile plastered on her face as though everything could be fixed with a few words. But I could see the desperation in her eyes. She wanted to salvage what was left of the family, to pull us back into the fold. Kirby didn't even flinch. He stood tall, his voice steady, but his words were sharp as he told her, "It's too late for all of you. Don't ever come near me again." I saw the finality in his eyes, the same determination I had seen when he had first rejected our parents. There was no going back, no forgiving them for the damage they had done. In that moment, Kirby had taken his power back. We had both done it. We were finally free of them, and nothing would ever change that.
The decision to cut our parents out of our lives had been hard, but watching Kirby stand firm from his rejection for them gave me a sense of relief I hadn't expected. He was no longer the broken person who had to hide from the world. He had taken back control of his life, and with that, he had given me the courage to do the same. But the quiet victory we felt wasn't enough to erase the lingering anger and hurt. As much as we tried to heal, the reality of what had been done to us kept creeping back in. We couldn't forget the betrayal, the cruelty, and the lies that had torn our world apart. It wasn't just the physical scars that had shattered us. It was the emotional damage that seemed impossible to fix. Kirby's PTSD was real, and I could see it in every moment of hesitation, every flinch at a loud sound, every night when he struggled to sleep. The memories of our parents' violence haunted him in ways I couldn't truly understand. And while we both tried to move forward, there were moments where the weight of it all felt unbearable. It wasn't until Kirby, with his newfound strength, pushed me to take the final step that I realized there was only one way for us to truly begin anew. We had to sever all ties with our past, completely. Kirby moved in with his paternal grandparents, a safe haven where he could finally begin to heal. And for me, it was time to follow him. As I packed my things, I felt a strange sense of finality. The house we had grown up in, once filled with laughter and love, was now just a reminder of what we had lost. I turned my back on it, knowing that this was the last step in our journey to freedom. We were no longer victims, we were survivors, and nothing, no one, could ever take that away from us. Our future was ours to build, and we were ready to rebuild it together.
As the finality of our decision BreakdownThe settled in, I felt a strange mixture of freedom and sorrow. We had done it, we had left the nightmare behind, but it wasn't without its cost. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy, and the weight of everything we had endured would take time to heal. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like we were finally taking control of our own destiny. Kirby was no longer the broken shell of a person he had been in that hospital room. He was beginning to reclaim his life piece by piece. But the scars ran deep, too deep for even time to erase. Our move to Kirby's paternal grandparents' house marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where we could heal, free from the toxic influence of our parents.
The house, though small, was warm with the kind of love and support we hadn't felt in so long. It became our sanctuary, a place where we could finally breathe, where the dark cloud that had hung over us for so long no longer had a hold. But even in this haven, there was always the looming fear of what our parents might do next. And they didn't disappoint. It wasn't long before they came knocking, relentless in their pursuit of us, demanding we come back. It was almost laughable how they acted as though nothing had happened, as though the years of emotional and physical trauma could just be forgotten with a few apologies. When they came to our new home, I could see the desperation in their eyes, the same desperation I had seen when they tried to force their way back into our lives before. This time, there was no hesitation. He was done. "I don't care what you have to say anymore," he said, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable edge. "You've lost me forever." As the door slammed in their faces, I realized how far we had come. We were free now. No more lies, no more fear. This was our new beginning. Together, Kirby and I had finally escaped the toxic grip of our past, and nothing, not even our parents, could take that away from us.
It was finally over. The weight of our past, the betrayal, the violence, everything we had endured had led us to this point. We were free. But as I looked around our new home, a place where we were slowly beginning to heal, a dark realization settled in. Our parents were not going to give up that easily. They were relentless, persistent, like a storm that refused to dissipate. It wasn't long before they made their move, showing up uninvited at Kirby's grandparents' house, demanding to speak with us, as if they could just erase the devastation they had caused with a few tearful words. I saw the familiar desperation in their eyes, the same desperation they had shown when they tried to break into our lives before. But this time, Kirby wasn't the broken boy they had tortured. He was strong, stronger than I had ever seen him. "We're done," Kirby said, his voice calm but unwavering. "You're nothing to me anymore." And as the door slammed in their faces, I felt a surge of relief flood through me. We were no longer prisoners to their lies. We had won. In that moment, I realized we didn't just survive, we had triumphed over the past that had almost destroyed us. Our future, finally, was ours to shape.